we find that when workers have the right type of training, they're 71% more likely to rate themselves as highly adaptable to change.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everyone, it's Ben Eubanks, host of We're Only Human, and I'm so glad you're here with us. Looking forward to a fun conversation about what's happening in the world of TA and some of the new research we've done with our friends over at Rival, and we're going to get into flexibility and agility as an organizational perspective, all that good stuff. Poornima, I'm so glad you're here with us and looking forward to the discussion. Welcome.
Yeah. Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for having me, and hi, listeners. I've been a follower of this podcast for a while. Delighted to be here.
It's always fun to have someone who's listened to the show now be on the show because you'll never listen to it quite the same way again. You're like, I know what it's like being on the other side of that. So
that's right.
Looking forward to some good stuff today. Before we get into that, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Yes, absolutely. I am the Chief Product Officer at Rival. We are a leading talent acquisition solution, and our products span across sourcing, recruiting, onboarding, learning, and performance. We have championed automation as well as analytics and AI in several of these spaces.
Yes, that's always a fun conversation for us because you and I started kicking around ideas like what's possible with AI and where do we use it to emphasize the human and all that good stuff. So I'm going to talk about some of those things probably in the conversation that'll come out. But just to kick us off a little bit, we worked together on some research earlier this year. And one of the things that we saw in there was that there's a big focus, there's this big demand for employers to have a workforce that's agile, that's flexible, that's able to respond to all these changes around us right now. What are you and the Rival team seeing when it comes to that with the clients that you're serving?
Yeah, great question. We were delighted to see the results of the study on your end, where you reported that more than half of the companies are essentially having trouble forecasting their hiring needs. Only 15% of the companies even have a truly engaging, personalized onboarding process. And as we took that back to our executive CAP membership, as well as our larger customer cohort, they came back and said, yep, we know this is the problem in our industry. And this is one of the reasons why we are with Rival in terms of building out that personalized onboarding, really scaling that end-to-end use case. The other thing we are seeing is also that a single talent acquisition tool is no longer the way to go. Often people want you to stay within their walled garden and hope that new technology is going to be delivered on a biannual cadence. But in reality, the needs are accelerated. There is more to be done with less, and therefore having multiple products that can actually plug and play in a modular way is a much more important direction that the industry is heading.
Yes, that's the essence of flexibility, right? If I need this, I can turn it on. If I need that, I can turn it off. We do just that without having to say, okay, let's start again from a blank whiteboard every time something changes, because if you're taking that approach, then you're never going to catch up. Things are moving too quickly to start from scratch every time to try to revisit that and solve whatever that problem happens to be.
Absolutely. In fact, even with the study, and we see this validated with our own customer cohort, 1 in 2 employers, whether that is enterprise or corporate clients, essentially say that they have trouble maintaining accurate recruitment data, and that includes onboarding data because it exists in multiple systems. So as much as IT may not want integrations, for instance, they are a requirement of how the business is conducted. More importantly, what starts to happen is that compliance, whether it's GDPR, CCPA, or even more granularly at the employee engagement and productivity level, no one wants to see their data in multiple systems and have it be inaccurate. If you change your name from when you got married, or if your address has changed from when you originally started at a company, you expect your employer to know those details and there's a sense of belonging and care at that level. So really kind of then that end-to-end experience of making sure that the data accuracy is in place, and then the analytics and the personalization that ties to that is also made available, I would say is a big part of the employee engagement and expectations today.
I would agree with that. I'm thinking you have this unique perspective as a chief product officer So you're thinking about the technology and how the pieces talk to each other, but you also have to think about how it talks with something else that might be in the company's technology stack. And so I was kind of talking with someone yesterday about that, an HR leader, and they're like, if only I could have these things in one place, because many times someone says, oh, we've got an API for that. Like it's a simple turn on, turn off. That's it. It's either yes, you have one, or no. And they're often messy. There's not good documentation. It's not easy to tie in, or if there's a problem, they just point at everybody else instead of trying to solve that. So even when someone says, oh, we've got an API for that, that doesn't mean that it's going to be as easy as plugging it in and turning it on. There's going to be a lot of other pieces potentially connected there. So when you can have that in a single ecosystem, as you were saying, the data are in one place, there's less have issues with keeping things current across all the systems, but you all the source of truth because there's one. There's not 7 different places where you're trying to gather that up. When someone asks you a question in the middle of a meeting, you know the answer because you can pull it up and tell them right there on the spot.
Absolutely. In that respect in particular, I think of Rival as one of the best kept secrets in the industry because of the level of engagement that we have with our clients in terms of building out management of their integrations, their APIs, the robustness of our system, and more importantly, the scalability along the way. So for example, if you are on HRIS system A, but you want to transition to a different system, you should not have to worry about every other piece of your technology not working anymore. Ideally, your recruiting or your learning technology should work with any system of record for the employees and make sure that is brought into consideration. So our ability to really think about the integration layer in a very robust way is a major differentiator that, to your point, is not necessarily something that TA leaders want to have to worry about. And because of the experiences that they have had in the past, are often skeptical of, for sure.
I want to ask you one more question before we move on a little bit. There was something you mentioned earlier, one of the stats in the study that's stood out to me, and it sounds like you've been bringing it up. I've been bringing it up because it's one of the ones that it helps build some urgency for those of us who have friends out there and you're listening in right now that might be thinking about your onboarding isn't where it should be or where it could be. We saw that only 15% of companies actually have this very personalized approach where the onboarding isn't this same one size fits all. Everyone gets the exact same thing, regardless of whether you're an executive starting, an entry-level person starting, someone transitioning, doesn't matter. Everyone gets the same thing. And so only 15% of companies are really tailoring that, personalizing for people. And I'd love to hear from you. You are thinking about this from a product perspective. What are some of the examples of what it looks like when it is personalized, when it is a little more tailored for a workforce or someone joining in as a new joiner to the company? I'd love for someone to hear that and start painting that picture in their head of what that 15%, if they got there, what that could look like for them if they had some technology that backed that up. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, let's dig into it. A topic near and dear to my heart. First, the very happy path, as we like to say in product use case for onboarding, is you brought in a new hire and then you're bringing it into the company and essentially making sure that all their paperwork is checked off. Our view at Rival is that is making sure that particular experience is done seamlessly should be table stakes. So that includes making sure that they're ramped up efficiently, that any paperwork that they have can be handled even on a pre-hire experience, offering them potentially a portal that gives them a look and feel that makes them feel like they're part of the journey from before day one, so that there is no concern in terms of withdrawing their offer or leaving within the first 3 months, etc. So the kind of personalization, I would say, from a new hire perspective just starts there in terms of pre-day one, making them feel like a part of the company, identifying buddies, their current skill sets, potentially goals, engaging them with their managers, giving them a welcome message from the CEO, welcome message from the HR, all of their tools, whether it's IT, benefits, being centralized into one single place. If they're handling I-9, for instance, in the US, then making sure that it's not just part of it in the system, but the full experience of I-9 handled within the system. And so really being able to have that full holistic experience from a new hire perspective. Now, what is interesting is that several companies will claim to do that well. However, regardless of the level of depth that their functionality have, in addition to this kind of onboarding, there's also a variety of other types of onboarding scenarios that are actually getting more and more common now. And so that could be mergers and acquisitions. You are brought on as part of a merger, you're coming into the new company, you don't quite know what are your new cultural values, how do you fit in? What is the new ticketing system? What is the new payroll system? How do I make sure I still get paid? What does that look like? So minimizing, if you will, the transition and really amplifying the level of personalization that an entire cohort can feel is one example of how onboarding can scale beyond just an individual employee. Similarly, a lot of rehires happening in our industries right now of folks that left an organization and are now coming back. And so regardless of the circumstances of their transition, there may be things that they already know and they want that to be personalized. Don't remind me of IT steps or don't remind me of benefits or payroll, but maybe include that information, but make sure that I know what structures might have changed or what new tooling I need to know in terms of doing my job well. Those are just some examples.
Excellent. I love the boomerangs, the rehires example, like some of those other ones where it's a little bit, we've already got these things on file for you. We can skip over those steps. We have twins at home. And so when I have to do a school forms, whatever else for one of them, I'm like, I just need to fill out everything except for their name and go put on the copier and then just put my name on it. I wish it was easier to do that with some of the other stuff in our lives. And as you're sharing, like that, employees have that same hope when it comes to onboarding or transitioning, as you were talking about some of those M&A and other examples there, where it can be a little bit easier, more personal, instead of it feeling like I'm being put through this same exact process, just another widget on an assembly line, instead of being a little more tailored to the things that I need there. Okay. Oh, I like that. I like it.
And those are all scenarios where often people leave, right? Like because they find those re-entry points or the M&A scenario is so challenging. So onboarding can be a really strong tooling, if you will. And that's why, as we talk about it in terms of how do we modernize those HR workflows so that we make onboarding bigger than it can be.
Yes. Well, in my head, we were talking about things like the portal and stuff like that, saying, you are about to become part of our company. We're going to go ahead and let you inside like the velvet rope. You're going to be on this side and we're going to start working with you and getting you ready so that you can shine when the day comes for day one. And that the connotation of that is we are excited to see you. We're preparing for you to be here. And almost all of us either have been through or know a friend who's been through that experience. We show up and the manager's like, oh yeah, today is your start day. Here's a chair and we'll see if we can get you something actually to do at some point today. And that feels the very opposite end of that, of prepared. It's like, oh goodness, do they really want me? Do they really care that? I wonder what that other job is still available. Like they start second guessing that versus cementing the decision they made to want to go and work for your company. You're telling them we're preparing a way for you. And we're so excited when you do start that all this will be taken care of, all your pre-boarding stuff, so you can jump in both feet and start contributing right away. That's a really exciting place to be for those individuals because they didn't join the company, as much as I like to think about it, to do their I-9s or do all the other processes and paperwork. They joined us to do some kind of work that's meaningful and fulfilling for them.
Yeah. And we've actually relaunched our portal with a fully modernized experience. We've seen tremendous adoption in that in our customer base. And in addition to that, we're also launching our revised high volume workflow automation capabilities, which are really focused on the HR side of this. So how do we make sure that there's a self-service element to it so that everything, even as simple as, let's say, policy acknowledgement, if you are coming in from one organization into another or adding different steps, can really just be quickly built out, deployed without a lot of manual intervention or worrying that, your implementation was done in a certain way and now there is no way to go back and make any additional configuration changes.
Okay. That goes back to what I shared at the beginning, I feel like, where we can't always predict the changes that are coming, but we have to have tools that are flexible enough to help us be flexible. If it's built completely rigid, then we're never going to be able to adapt because we're locked into something. So, okay, let's talk about one of those tools that there's not a lot of love for often in the space. And that's the ATS as an example of this. So one of the things in the data, one of the questions we asked was, tell us about which of these is true for the ATS or applicant tracking system you're using at your company. And we let them pick some answers like, this is your strategic tool. It helps us perform better as a team. This is pretty administrative in nature, or it's a painful experience to use and candidates avoid it. We avoid it. And unfortunately, as all of us probably can imagine, some people even picked that answer as a choice. And so we see this sort of focus in the space, but many of these tools are seen as administrative or just record keeping, not as a way for us to create better relationships, to be more effective, be more productive as teams. So talk about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what were some of the takeaways around that maybe for you as someone who thinks about the product, what sort of things maybe you're missing, or what are some ideas that we could use to create a better reality for people out there on that?
Absolutely. I think The number one challenge we have seen historically with the ATS is that it comes essentially as a blank slate, and then you have to do all the work to really make it effective in your organization. And especially in the changes that we saw in the last few years in the various industries when it came to talent acquisition leaders and their departments, some of the strategic elements of how recruiting was approached definitely got lost as departments were transitioning into being more focused on disseminating the work that they have to do across hiring managers as well as recruiters. In addition to that, ATSs can also be very focused on essentially having a very one size fits all mindset, which again, going back to the flexibility, is a core need. Some of the things that we're doing, let me start with some data, right? As we saw in the study, 83% of companies have said that they would be interested in an ATS or CRM that comes preloaded with candidate data. And as our ATS comes preloaded with 700 million candidate data that is refreshed on a regular basis and is really focused on providing both skills and insights on the candidates and is fully searchable across a variety of dimensions, including geo, skills, level of expertise, and so forth. So through this, we're really making it easier to look very quickly at what does your talent pool look like for your organization? How do you want to create outreach to them in terms of whether doing it in bulk via CRM capabilities that are now brought into our ATS or doing it more directly with the SMS or email options. Beyond this, there's also this whole new chapter in the talent acquisition journey that is being written by AI technology. That is everything from generative AI-based job description creation and candidate outreach, email creation, to going into more of a question and answering system. So that includes everything from giving recruiters a tool that they need from a co-pilot perspective to having them go into the different parts of the product to learn about how can they do X or Y to really make their workflow more effective, and also building out a question answer journey with their candidates. So as much of the time that can be taken away from the administrative elements of ATS into and giving that time back to the recruiters to really spend with key candidates is going to be the way that ATS can ultimately become more strategic.
About the generative AI piece of that. And I'm hearing from so many employers that are looking at trying to figure out ways to make it practical. Like there's all this hype around it. And I love that you shared some very specific and detailed examples of how we can use that and wrap that into what we're doing already to help us be more effective, to be more capable as recruiting teams, especially for the ones who are, I love to use the example of I recruited for an organization, I recruited helicopter pilots and software engineers and things, but you drop me into a healthcare organization and they'd be speaking English, but I wouldn't understand any of it because it's all these other acronyms and everything else. And so some of the tools, making that easier, making us smarter, helping to level up the performance of each individual. I think that's the part that excites me. And hearing about some of these ways you're talking about here, it wraps all together and it makes it easy for an employer. The other part you talked about, the ATS loaded with data, I'm seeing more and more companies try to go in that direction because they're seeing that hunger from the buyer community to say, listen, if I've got a choice between I can buy a kitchen that's not furnished or I can buy a kitchen that's furnished, I'd rather have the furnished kitchen and get started immediately than start from scratch and try to build that up myself. So I think there's a lot of good to be said there. And you've shared some of the data points already for the demand for that from the employer audience out there is extremely high.
Absolutely. I love the kitchen metaphor. And let's take it a step further, right? What would happen if your kitchen could also help prepare meals? What would happen if it could actually say, okay, let me build out the full scale of all the snack preparation that I have to do on a daily basis? So I think of those, to bring it down to earth, I guess, more as bulk and high volume automation scenarios. So similar to what we were talking about with onboarding, there is just such a tremendous need for high volume interviewing, high volume auto disposition, high volume scheduling, outreach. And so our focus in the coming months, and some of those features have already been released, are really focused more on how do we make the high volume scenarios better, because that is really the next milestone. Yes, now you have your candidate data preloaded and you can search, you can start to have better engagement with your hiring managers. You also have built-in analytics that can start to give you conversation points with your talent acquisition and HR leaders. What about that third milestone that is really focused on the candidates and really making sure that we can do large scale outreach while also maintaining personalization on the candidate side.
All right. So we've covered some good ground so far. We talked a little bit about onboarding and the importance of having data in one place. We talked about the ATS. Let's go the ugly, the good, and the very good, I would say. Let's wrap up with a discussion a little bit about skills, if you don't mind, because that's a conversation I'm having, which I had to boil down the last year of my life. It's been AI and skills. Like those are the most common conversations that happen both on the vendor side as well as the employer side. People are curious about it. They're talking about it. And I'd love to hear from you. What's your perspective on that? Where do you think skills fit in this bigger picture? You've talked about different things throughout this conversation, definitely recruiting, but also you mentioned learning early on. So talk about some of the pieces and how you see skills fitting into this talent conversation and solving some of the problems that employers have.
Great question. I've been thinking about the skills journey within talent acquisition and HCM for more than half a decade at this point. And I would say that the promise versus the potential has always been an interesting barometer in this particular topic. So from an employer perspective, they want to know what are the skills at the organizational level that exist in the cohort, and then how do we really upskill the different employees. On the flip side, from an employee perspective, they feel like, and we see this in the study, that almost 2/3 of them feel like their particular set of skills are not necessarily understood or valued by the employers. And we also see that regardless of the understanding of the skills, it really comes down to training and engagement and career development that the employers are putting into the employees that is seen as a priority in terms of how the skills can be built. So what I mean by that is there is the analysis of the skills, and then there is the investment and development of the skills.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear that from the employee perspective, they really care more about the investment, whereas what we see from the employers is that they want the analysis. And for us at Rival right now, we're focused on the investment layer pretty heavily. We find that when workers have the right type of training, they're 71% more likely to rate themselves as highly adaptable to change. So tying this back to our earlier message on stability and agility, if we are identifying the gaps and needs, it has to then translate into the right kind of learning content, the right kind of goals and check-ins in the performance management system that can then ensure that the employees feel nurtured and valued along the journey of their organization.
I don't know if I shared this stat with you before, but one of the ones that stunned me, and the reason we asked some of those questions in the study around adaptability to change is because back around the beginning of the pandemic, we had done a survey around learning, and we asked the question about, has your company helped you adapt through all the things that are going on right now? Like the world's big, and a lot of things that happen to people were not related to their employment at all. Right. But one of the things we found is when people said that they had the right training, the right things at work like that to help support them, they're much more likely to say that their company had helped them adapt across their entire life to those things. And it was my reminder that for anybody out there that's doing work, and I've mentioned this in front of audiences of training leaders and learning leaders, it's easy to focus and think only about, as you're talking about, this layer of, are employees being developed? Are they growing a skill? Those things are important. But we don't always see that we're having this bigger impact on them beyond that, making them feel like they have control over their destiny and the ultimate direction of their career, and helping them with something today that meets a need they have. It helps them fill that gap, be a higher performer, but it also gives them this perspective, this glimpse of what we see them doing long-term and the success they can have. And it's hard to quantify that, but it's there. And we see it in the data. It's so important to people.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. One of the things that we've just rolled out is the analytics around top searches in our learning management system. And it actually came from a customer request. And it makes sense, right? They want to know what kind of questions are learners having in terms of the courses that they would want to see, because often it is from the learning administration perspective, there are either company charters or objectives that are driving certain course content creation, or there are specific modules that are required by specific departments. But wouldn't it be nice if we actually also did it bottoms up and gathered more custom client learner feedback in terms of what would appeal to them, what looks interesting to them from, as you said, the long-term career development perspective, which has a direct correlation with being more engaged in the workforce, staying in the company longer, as well as being more productive.
I get excited on all those levels. The audience cannot see my face as I'm sitting here like thinking and like doing the far off stare, thinking about all the applications of this, but you can see it there. So you have to peer deeply into your earbuds for everybody out there that listening in to see that look on my face. But so Poornima, before we wrap up here, I want to ask you anything else that we found in the study that was particularly interesting to you, or any other advice you might want to take a minute and just share with our friends out there working in HR and TA and learning that are listening here. Anything that you want to share before we wrap up today that might be helpful to them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing I would say is, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for listening. It's always great to engage in this discussion. I would say that the way that we're seeing employers track the value of some of these capabilities and asks, whether it's internal mobility, performance, learning, skills, talent acquisition, is changing on a day-to-day basis. So when you are talking to a vendor, consider diving deeper. Don't believe the hype, don't believe just the marketing, but really look at what does their technology offer today? Do they have the feature depth of 20 years, for example, that Rival does in this space to really be able to come up with all of the different scenarios and use cases that you're inevitably going to run into, because this is a market that is shifting and growing very rapidly.
Yes, great way to wrap it up. Wonderful. Okay. Again, I want to ask you like 3 more questions after that one. That's a really good way to wrap this up. So if someone wants to learn more about Rival, they want to understand what y'all are doing. You mentioned some of the things today and ways you're helping customers solve problems now, but what's the best way for them to connect?
Yeah, follow us on LinkedIn at Rival. You can also go to our website, rival-hr.com, to learn more, as well as request a demo, and we'd be happy to connect and our plans and journey with you.
Wonderful. Poornima, so fun to chat with you. So excited to see the research we did together continuing to impact lives out there, to help employers out there, to kind of shine a light in the dark a little bit. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. And as I mentioned to you, I've definitely talked about these stats, both internally as well as externally. I see a lot of value in listening to our customers, listening to the market, learning. We're all in this together.
Okay, wonderful. To everybody else out there, I hope you got some good notes, some good ideas for the conversation today. Remember some of the things that Poornima shared there towards the end. Make sure when you're talking to solution providers, you're asking deeper questions. Don't get swayed by some flashy headline or something hypey. Dive in a little bit, make sure it has the ability to adapt what you need long-term, because that's what your business needs from you long-term. Keep all that in mind. We'll catch you again next time on We're Only Human.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.